I talk to a lot of the people that have moved from California to Florida, and we never used to get people from California to Florida or really anywhere in these, because why would you leave California? It's got the best weather.
Great question, and one I will share personal insight about a little bit later. Welcome back to Shadow Wreckardz, independent media for the people. If you're familiar with the channel, you may be asking, why haven't you uploaded a video in so long? You also may be wondering, where the hell is the wood paneling? The answer to both of those questions is, I moved. And while I thought about making videos during that process, I was unable to pull it off. But I'm happy to be back, and this will be my temporary studio space for now. I'm also planning to film more on location, as you saw from the first part of this video. But for now, let's get back to where we left off with that assessment from Ron DeSantis. That was in reference to this data presented by Sean Hannity.
In 2021, 2022, California's lost 750,000 residents to other states. Governor DeSantis, during that same two-year period, you gained 454,000 residents. It's a simple question. How do you explain this phenomenon? Governor, what's going on?
Now, DeSantis would address this question throughout the debate, but presents several key factors here.
When I was in the Navy, I got orders to go to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in Southern California. And I was a lifelong Floridian, but I went there and I was like, man, this is one of the most beautiful places on earth. And I think California has more natural advantages than any state in the country. You almost have to try to mess California up. And yeah, that's what Gavin Newsom has done since he's been governor. He's the first governor to ever lose population. They actually, at one point, ran out of U-Hauls in the state of California because so many people were leaving. Of course, he's imposed restrictions on his own people while exempting himself from those restrictions and going to the French Laundry while his people were suffering. He led the country in school closures, locking kids out of school while he had his own kids in private school in person.
Now, Newsom did everything he could to avoid providing his own explanation. But when repeatedly pressed by Hannity as well as DeSantis to provide some insight, he finally responded with this.
California has no peers. California dominates, sizable 21 state populations combined. It's the fifth largest economy in the world. We dominate, #1 manufacturing state. We dominate in two-way trade and research and development, access to innovation, more scientists, more researchers, more engineers, more Nobel laureates in the state of California than any other state in the nation, the finest system of higher education. It's the birthplace of life science and biotech and nanotechnology. We dominate in green tech. We dominate in high tech. We dominate in artificial intelligence.
Did that have anything to do with the question? I think this response actually makes Ron DeSantis' point stronger. He's right about many of those impressive California attributes. Like DeSantis said, you really have to try to mess up California. If that's the case, then why has this gifted state recently had a net loss of 750,000 residents, while the state of Florida gained 450,000? Okay, the rain is picking up. Now, I can't speak for the other 749,999, but I can share my personal experience, as I was one of those people who, after living in San Diego for 15 years, fled California. And I do mean fled. It was in December of 2020, at the height of the global health crisis, and I had had enough. I spent several days tying up loose ends, packed a carload of my stuff, and drove cross-country to my father's house in North Carolina. When I got out of California to my first stop, Lake Havasu, Arizona, I truly felt like I escaped from something very dark. I went over to the tavern across the street from my hotel and had the most delicious pot roast special amongst a jovial and largely unmasked clientele. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope for humanity. I think the last straw for me was when Gavin Newsom banned outdoor dining for the second time against all scientific evidence that I could find. I went from questioning his judgment and leadership to questioning his intentions. I actually began to fear what he would do next. I pictured all of the local establishments that I loved being driven out of business one by one, and me not being able to easily fly home to see my family on the East Coast, at least not without taking an experimental vaccine. And as far as I was concerned, that was not an option. waiting for the geese to quiet down. So to mitigate that risk, I had to move closer, leaving behind a place and life that I truly loved. Now, while I left primarily due to policies related to the so-called health crisis, I had close personal friends who left for completely different reasons. Reasons best embodied by this devastating anecdote from Ron DeSantis.
So I was talking to a fella who had made the move from California to Florida, and he was telling me that Florida is much better governed, safer, better budget, lower taxes, all this stuff. And he's really happy with the quality of life. And then he paused and he said, by the way, I'm Gavin Newsom's father-in-law. So we do count Gavin's in-laws as some of the people that have fled California and come to the state of Florida. And why are we getting people to come? We have a 50-year low in the crime rate. You don't see, in the last 10 years, we've had a 45% decline in homelessness. California's had a 45% increase in homelessness.
That pretty much aligns with what those friends told me. They had a young child, and they were looking for lower cost of living, lower taxes, lower crime, and better education. There were many other highlights in this debate that I did not cover. I simply wanted to relate my personal story to one of the relevant topics. If you haven't had a chance to check it out in its entirety, I highly recommend you do. Now, you may have noticed that I originally fled to North Carolina. So how did I end up in the very blue state of New Jersey? Well, that's a story for another video, but I will say this. Although I dramatized the transition to drive the point home, there were many silver linings along the way. I made lifelong friends in the Carolinas. And now I'm back in my hometown. I get to see my mom, sister, brother-in-law, nephews more frequently, and hang out with some of the best friends I've ever had. And that is how I see it, my friends. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the content. Subscribe to the channel for more. See you soon.